Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
Last week, we began covering the shooting death of Diane Smith McIver and what would become the subsequent murder trial. The question was never who shot Diane. Both the prosecution and defense agreed. Her husband, Claude Tex McIver, shot her.
And on September 25th, 2016, the day that the defendant shot his wife in the back, his life was spinning out of control.
No one is going to ask you to decide who was holding the gun when it went off. It was Tex.
After Diane and Tex enjoyed a relaxing weekend at their Putnam County ranch with Diane's best friend, Danny Jo Carter, the three headed back to Atlanta on the night of September 25, 2016. The drive was detoured due to construction on the expressways. So Danny, Jo, and Diane decided to take the back roads the rest of the way home. Tex says he thought it was a dangerous area. To be prepared for the worst-case scenario, he asked Diane to hand him his gun.
We went through an area, I could describe my familiarity with it, but we went through an area I thought that was particularly dangerous at night. I'd seen police vehicles there. It's a route I take from my office to her office. Okay. And I see police vehicles there with blue lights on, and they're doing things with people that are there. And
remember any landmarks or anything?
It was an underpass.
Okay.
As best it's very dark, but it seemed to me it was. And that's one that has a particularly high population of homeless people.
Okay.
At least in the daytime. But at night, there were a lot of people there.
Okay.
And I quickly said, this is a big mistake, and we're in a place that we don't belong.
After turning down Piedmont, the road that would lead them straight home, the gun went off.
I heard a big boom, and I didn't know what it was. I thought there was an explosion somewhere, and my head turned to the right, and I looked out the window and wondered where there was an explosion or if somebody behind us was getting ready to hit us or something had happened behind us. I did not realize that it was a gunshot right away.
Tex directed Danny Jo to Emory University Hospital. It was a hospital that was known to not deal well with gunshot wounds. At trial, the prosecutor said that billboards around the city said just that. And Terry Sullivan, a nurse at the hospital, said on the stand that it wasn't an injury they usually saw.
You thought he was guilty because nobody with a gunshot would ever come to Emory. Isn't that what you told Mr. Rucker?
That is a true statement that I said we do not get gunshot victims to Emory because we're not a trauma center. They would come in, we wouldn't take an ambulance person with a gunshot wound because the EMS know that they have to take them either to Grady or AMC. And in my experience, if anybody comes with a significant gunshot, there's never been a situation that there wasn't something to it that the police ended up wanting to know about or that turned out to be a police matter.
Initially, however, everyone involved said it was an accident, including Diane, as she was being treated by doctors.
Was there a time when Diane McIver said other things to you after this?
That's when she said it was an accident.
Okay. And tell the jurors this. Was that in response to a question that you asked her?
No.
But as investigators began to dig into the couple's marriage, they believed they found a motive for murder. Diane was a self-made millionaire. At the age of 63, she was still bringing in over $20,000 a month from her various businesses. Tex's income, while an attorney in the Atlanta area for over 40 years, had begun to dwindle. He had even taken a $350,000 loan from his wife, one he hadn't paid back.
And on September 25th, 2016, Diane was making all of the money. Diane owned the 2 condos in Buckhead. Diane could take the ranch. This ranch, according to the witnesses, that was his pride and joy. This ranch that he would go to every weekend, that he would host parties at, that he would go shooting at, Diane could take from him. On Diane's death, he went from negative $5,000 to over $1.1 million cash instantly. And he was the executor and one of the beneficiaries of Diane's $7 million estate. The easiest way for him to gain control was to kill Diane. And on Sunday, September 25th, 2016, the evidence will show that is just what he did.
Investigators were also suspicious of Tex's behavior after Diane's death.
The defendant began to inventory all of her belongings. Her jewelry, her clothes, her hats, shoes, everything that she had, he began to inventory it so that he could sell it. And what the defendant told media outlets and journalists is that he was doing this in order to satisfy the bequests in her will. And he had an estate sale and an auction and raised over $187,000. And the evidence will show that to this date, not one of those bequests have been paid.
But the most troubling behavior to investigators wasn't about the money or selling Diane's things so soon after her death. According to prosecutors, he also attempted bribes.
And what he tells Mr. Dickerson is, you can get this case dismissed. You can get this case dismissed. And if you do, there's a large bonus in it for you.
He also left veiled threats on voicemail.
Sir, let me just be plain. Danny is about to send me to prison. Please erase this voicemail message, but call me right away. Y'all have no idea the problem this is causing. It's innocent, but it's absolutely nuclear for me. Please call me.
What were initially involuntary manslaughter and reckless conduct charges were elevated to malice murder and influencing witnesses, charges that had Tex hiring new attorneys before his trial began and before a jury would hear another explanation for what happened.
The gun is in Tex's lap, okay? It's kind of laying sideways in his lap. Like this, he's falling asleep. When they get back in my car, the gun just discharges and goes off.
Ultimately, it would be up to a Fulton County jury to decide if Diane's death was an accident or murder. This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, Episode 153, Part 2. In the days, weeks, and months after Diane's death, Tex made several statements to the public about the night of the shooting. His first statement was by way of Public Relations Manager Bill Crane. The statement painted a picture of being afraid of his surroundings due to Black Lives Matter protests earlier in the week. Crane also said that the gun went off because the car hit a bump in the road, a statement that was later corrected by Tex's attorney Steve Maples. Even though Bill Crane had reportedly verified all the information with Tex before putting the statements out to the media, Tex wanted him to retract all of it. The Black Lives Matter mention made him look bad, and the part about the bump and the lie about not drinking didn't match his statements to the police.
When Tex got there, he told me that he needed to speak to me, then. And this was the first time I'd seen him in person since the night of the shooting. So I agreed. We went back into a conference room next to Mr. Grover's offices, and Tex kind of, I wouldn't say collapsed, but sort of slumped into the chair. He looked very fatigued, and obviously he'd been under a lot of stress. And the gist of the conversation was, I need you to fall on your sword. I need you to take back what you said regarding Black Lives Matter. I need you to help me make this go away or come up with a strategy as a PR person to make this go away.
With the discrepancies in these statements, the district attorney's office went back to Emory University Hospital and spoke with the staff who were working the night of Diane's death. Just within the first few hours, staff overheard several different stories. One nurse overheard Tex talking about cleaning his gun in a bathroom when it went off.
I heard him say, and this is what I heard, and it was in passing. I was passing through that I was cleaning my gun in the bathroom and I shot her.
I'm sorry.
I was cleaning my gun in the bathroom and I shot her.
And you heard him say that?
Yes, from him, not from anybody else.
Just to be sure, so the hallway is there. When you were passing him, were you close to him?
Yes.
Others heard him prepping his story with his attorney, Steve Maples, who showed up within a half hour at the hospital.
Were there any other words that you heard?
It was a longer conversation. It was tell them, and then there was some other words, and then this is what you're going to tell them.
Okay.
Still other nursing staff watched how the night unfolded and found it reminiscent of an infamous case in California.
Do you remember talking to all the nurses that this case was like OJ?
That was a discussion with the techs were having, yes.
And they were likening it to OJ and Cato Kalin, right? And some of the nurses in the ER, some of the techs, the people you were talking with, that you heard, were saying, he's going to get off because he has money.
That is correct.
That's what the nurses were saying. Just like OJ got off because he had money.
That is what was said by one of the techs.
And an ER doctor from the hospital spoke to Tex that night, too. She said when she asked him what happened, he told her they were driving in a bad neighborhood and Diane asked for the gun. She reached into the console and got it. She then took it and put it behind her back. As they were driving, it went off. By April 2017, the prosecution hadn't only upgraded the involuntary manslaughter to malice murder, they also added the charge of influencing witnesses.
While the defendant was telling all of these stories and trying to change the narrative of what really happened, he had one big problem, and that was Danny Joe Carter. And the evidence is going to show that after they arrived at Emory, what he did was he told Danny Joe, you know, these situations can get a little bit crazy. So why don't you tell the police that you were not in the SUV tonight and that you just arrived at the hospital sometime later? And Danny Joe told him, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to say that because that's not true.
Tex had wanted Danny Joe to say that she had just arrived and was a family friend. Danny Joe had clearly driven Diane and Tex to the hospital. The staff saw her, as well as the video cameras, so she wasn't about to lie.
And he said, I know, what did he say?
I know this doesn't look good.
Then what's the next thing that happened?
He looked up and didn't look at me, but looked past me and said, I don't trust these guys. Danny Joe, I hate to see you get wrapped up in this. I've seen how these things can go down.
But it wasn't the last time he tried to influence Danny Joe. The two saw each other about 2 weeks later. Diane and Tex's godson, Austin, had a football game. Tex attended the game, and so did Danny Jo. He tried to talk to her about the case. He wanted to know what she had told the police. Danny Jo said she still wanted to believe at this point that it had been an accident. But Tex wasn't so sure she was being honest about her conversations with the police, or at least in what she was telling him. Tex wanted Danny Jo to make a public statement with his attorneys. A car was sent to pick her up, but she wasn't there. So Tex called Danny Jo's husband, Tom Carter.
Tommy Lee is Tex. Sir, let me just be plain. Danny is about to send me to prison. Please erase this voicemail message, but call me right away. Y'all have no idea the problem this is causing. It's innocent, but it's absolutely nuclear for me. Please call me.
When Danny Jo spoke with Tex, she voiced her concerns about the will Diane had planned on changing. Diane had told Danny Jo and others that she wanted the ranch to go to her godson, Austin. But the will Tex was working off of was made in 2006, before Austin was born. It was another reason Danny Jo and others were concerned with how Tex was handling Diane's death. Tex, being a prominent attorney in the area, had many high-powered attorneys and political friends. He had hired some to represent him. Steve Maples, his original criminal defense attorney, had told him to cut ties with public relations manager Bill Crane after the first public statement to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And so Tex did. He eventually hired a new public relations person and crisis manager, Jeff Dickerson. Dickerson had a close relationship with Paul Howard, the district attorney.
And what he'll testify to is that after he was hired by the defendant, he was called down to his lawyer's office. And the defendant and his lawyer were sitting at a table. Then the lawyer gets up to leave. And it's just the defendant and Mr. Dickerson. And what he tells Mr. Dickerson is, you can get this case dismissed. You can get this case dismissed. And if you do, there's a large bonus in it for you. And I won't mind if you share it with the DA.
By the time Tex's trial started, he had hired new attorneys. Bruce Harvey and Don Samuel were two of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. In trying to poke holes in the prosecution's case, one of the things they did was to question Jeff Dickerson about this very conversation on the stand. They didn't deny that the conversation happened, but instead they argued it was a joke, which they said was clear because Tex never followed up on the request or the promise of a bonus.
This was not a serious comment. And in fact, it was a stupid comment because it could be easily misinterpreted like it is now. Tex did not mean for Jeff Dickerson to run off and try to bribe Paul Howard. And the evidence is going to show to you that there are a lot of reasons why that's not true. First of all, he doesn't say to Jeff Dickerson, go tell Paul Howard that I'm going to pay you a success fee if you can get the charges dropped, and that you'll share it with Paul Howard. That's not what he says. Second, Tex never followed up with Jeff Dickerson. Hey, have you had that meeting with Paul Howard yet? Did you tell him about the success fee? When are you going to have that meeting? Is something on the calendar yet? None of those conversations ever took place. They never discussed the amount of this supposed success fee. Tex wasn't trying to bribe the DA. He wasn't attempting to commit a crime.
The defense also said that Tex suffered from a sleeping disorder, which could likely explain what happened that night.
You are also going to hear evidence that Tex has a sleeping disorder. It's called REM behavior disorder. It is abbreviated as RBD. So most of us, when we fall asleep and when we dream, kind of a curtain comes down in our mind. So that if we're dreaming that we're running or jumping or whatever, our body is not physically acting out what we're doing in our dreams. People who have REM behavior disorder do experience physical movement while they're dreaming. They can jab and kick if somebody else happens to be in bed with them, because they have whole body jerks. They can have whole body jerks when they're experiencing a dream and they have REM behavior disorder. Mr. McIver has a well-documented history, going back more than a decade, of having REM behavior disorder. And I expect that you will hear evidence about that. I expect you will also hear about something called confusional arousals. And I'm not going to get too far into the details of that with you, but confusional arousals are also sometimes referred to as sleep drunkenness. It's when somebody is startled awake and they are disoriented as to where they are, and they act in a way that doesn't make sense or is inappropriate, maybe even violent. And most importantly, when somebody has experienced a confusional arousal, they can have amnesia, which means they may not be able to recall what exactly happened when they were woken up from their sleep.
This disconnect between dream state and reality is something Tex alluded to in his interview with police. He called it twilight. Here's a clip from that interview. Afterwards, I'll recap it since it's a little difficult to understand.
What's the next thing that you can remember from there?
Despite the fact I was tired, I don't sleep well in cars. It's just the motion and so on. So it's kind of a twilight zone thing for me.
Okay.
I remember the turn going from I-20 onto the connector. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty hard ride.
Yeah.
Guaranteed to wake me up. And the next thing I remember is we're going down. And the connector doesn't go down. We've been on it a lot, but we were going down, and just wondering what that was. And then the turn was made, and I knew then that we were no longer on the connector.
Right.
And I came up and I said, "Girls, where are we, and what's happening here?"
Right.
We were clearly off our path.
Right.
He said he was tired, that he doesn't sleep well in the car, that it's kind of a twilight zone for him. He said he remembers going down and making a turn. He knew they were no longer on the connector, and he asked the women what was going on and where they were. Dr. David Rye told the court he did an extensive physical and neurological exam on Tex in January 2018, before trial. Tex's medical records showed he first had sleep issues in the early 2000s. Dr. Rye said he diagnosed him with REM sleep behavior disorder. He noted that when he tested Tex, he first fell asleep in 2 minutes. Then, the next day for his nap, he fell asleep within 5 minutes.
What Mr. McIver relayed to you about falling asleep and then being awakened when the gun went off, is that consistent or inconsistent with a confusional arousal?
I think it's one explanation. It's consistent.
And is your opinion based solely on what Mr. McIver told you?
Well, that's part of the equation. I think the other part of the equation is having a predisposition, as defined by being, always loving to take a nap. I can't remember the exact phrase, and the data that's in the literature, having REM behavior disorder, which I think is indisputable, made by several people, that diagnosis, and as having an increased likelihood of experiencing a confusional arousal, and then a trigger. I can't speak to the trigger and what it was.
Wait, now, when you say trigger, just to be clear, you're talking about the
trigger
on the gun or something else?
The trigger, yeah, I just realized that.
Okay.
I almost caught myself. Environmental stimulus that may have prompted this to happen.
Is there anything about pulling a trigger on a gun that is inconsistent with having a confusional arousal?
I don't think so.
The prosecution wasn't sold on the fact that this was how the gun went off. If Tex had a well-documented sleep disorder, Why hadn't he mentioned that from the very beginning? During his police interview, investigators asked if he had any medical conditions. Tex only mentioned high cholesterol. The prosecution went back to the night of the shooting, specifically to one detail, the light brown Publix bag the gun was inside. Danny Jo told the jury she had never seen the gun kept like that. It was so out of the ordinary that, despite it being at the top of the console, she nor Diane knew it was there. The bag and the gun were a main point of the trial. Trace evidence scientist Sarah Peppers with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations testified to the gunshot residue and how the bag may have affected the presence of it.
If a gun is completely wrapped inside of this plastic bag, is it possible that GSR, in my hand, the gun is wrapped completely in the bag and my hand is on the trigger from outside the bag, is it possible that GSR would not get on my hands?
Yeah, I'm going to object to that. Okay. Do you understand the question?
Yes, so may I answer?
You may answer.
Okay. So even if your hand is on the outside of the bag, that plume is going to emit from the weapon. So if there is any gapping in the bag or anything that would allow the plume to get to the outside, including if a bullet was expelled from the bag, that could all be a potential for some to still get on an individual's hand. Now, would it be as much as I would expect if the hand was not on the outside of the bag? Probably not, but there's still a potential, even if the hand was on the outside and the gun potentially was on the inside, that GSR could still land on an individual's hand.
The investigation into the shooting also included a 3D reconstruction based on statements from Danny Jo's and Tex's police interviews. Michael Knox is a crime scene reconstruction expert and owns his own firm. He made the conclusion, based on Tex's statements, that the gun could not have been held as he indicated during his police interview.
Can you tell the jurors the position of the hands of the person we see in States 281A here, kind of in between the legs, this way with the fingers pointed downward? Can you tell the jury, is this hand position consistent or inconsistent with the trajectory that you found during your analysis?
That would be inconsistent.
Inconsistent.
That's correct.
This is States Exhibit 285A. Again, can you take a look at this photograph, and if you could tell the jurors the position of the hands in this photograph, wherein the fingers are in a slightly downward position. Can you tell the jurors, is that hand position consistent or inconsistent with the analysis that you did in the vehicle with respect to trajectory?
It would be inconsistent.
Knox was also asked if you could determine which firing action or mode the gun was set to. The defense said you could not. The expert agreed with that conclusion.
What actually ended up happening is that the two different modes produced very similar depths. So there was not enough difference between them to be able to distinguish one from the other. Because what we're doing is basically statistical analysis to figure out whether one is sufficiently different from the other to be able to discern. And in this case, you couldn't tell. The depths were very similar, so there would be no way to really discern whether the gun was fired single action with the hammer cocked first or double action with the hammer not cocked first.
After investigators visited the Putnam County ranch the McIvers owned, there was another detail from that night they thought the jury should hear. All three cell phones, Diane's, Danny Jo's, and Tex's, were in the back seat with Tex, yet he never tried to call 911. The defense said this was because they were driving to the hospital and he was caring for Diane. Danny Jo said she was focused on driving and wasn't sure why Tex didn't call. The prosecution argued it was Tex's state of mind. At court, they presented a picture from the ranch. Investigator Terry Jackson described coming across a sign that said, "We don't dial 911." Then both sides of the courtroom turned their focus to the murder weapon. Was the gun in working order? Was there anything unusual about it? Tex told police he hadn't fired the gun in several years after purchasing it in 2013. The defense said this about the gun.
If you do not cock the hammer on this gun, you can fire it by pulling the trigger. And as the state told you, it takes about 12 pounds of force to pull the trigger when it is in double action mode. When you cock the hammer on the gun and it's in single action mode, it only takes 2 pounds of force, which is almost a hair trigger. It is getting, that amount of force is so low, it is almost to the point where they can't measure it because it's so light. So the gun can go off very easily when it is in single action mode.
According to the prosecution, the gun was in perfect working order. It was a trigger pull, meaning an accidental firing was unlikely.
The gun was aimed. The gun was in perfect working condition. This was not a malfunctioning gun. This gun didn't just go off. This gun had the trigger pulled.
During the trial, the hospital staff was also asked about Tex's demeanor. The big question, did he display the appropriate grief for losing the love of his life? They said no. The prosecution later noted that Tex shed no tears for 2 days, but he contacted his attorney and began cataloging Diane's belongings. The defense said the lack of reaction proved that it was in fact an accident. If Tex had planned to kill his wife, it certainly wouldn't have been in front of her best friend. District Attorney Clint Rucker told the jury that not only was Tex cataloging Diane's belongings and preparing them for sale shortly after her death, but that he wasn't really broken up about losing the love of his life. Instead, the prosecution implied that he had been having affairs, another blow to dispel the idea of Diane and Tex being a perfect couple. This implication was a constant bickering point between the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution presented testimony that the masseuse both Diane and Tex saw had been seen wearing Diane's boots after her death. The defense didn't want that entered into evidence. The judge sided with the prosecution.
I think that it is an issue in play that is reasonable rebuttal material to much of what the jury's been exposed to that would suggest that Mr. McIver isn't someone who would have Annie Anderson wearing his wife's boots just a few days after his wife died.
The defense called any inferences of Tex having had affairs outrageous during court. They even asked masseuse Annie Anderson about her specific interactions with Tex. They directly asked her about any sexual encounters.
Did you ever have a romantic relationship with Tex McIver?
Never.
Did you ever perform a massage on him any time in the months following the death of his wife, Diane, which he was naked?
1,000% never.
Did you ever touch him sexually?
Never.
Did he ever touch you sexually?
Never.
Are you aware that the prosecution in this case has suggested
Objection,
otherwise?
Judge. That's them commenting.
Yeah, different question.
Yeah.
Have you been approached by people in the community about what they've heard about
Objection, Judge.
Your Honor, they have spent
But
days
objection,
after that.
I object to the speaking objection in front of the jury.
Well, he's responding to your objection, but you're free to argue when it's time to argue what you think the state has done, but to characterize it in the form of a question to this witness, I don't think is appropriate.
I think the effect it has had on her, the effect it's had on her family,
Which is relevant to what the jury needs to decide in what way.
Her credibility here today. Her credibility.
One, hasn't been challenged, and two, maybe you're going to get into some other area that's relevant to what the jury needs to decide, such that her credibility would be an issue.
The state has made an issue.
Objection, Judge. Again.
The state has.
Just let him. I'll cut him off.
Okay.
It needs to be cut off.
The state introduced numerous witnesses that this witness was in the bedroom the night after Diane McIver died, went to the ranch, wore the boots, and now I can't ask any questions about the effect that those kinds of allegations have had on her and her family?
Correct. You cannot.
I don't want you to mince words with me. I don't want this to be like a Bill Clinton type of question and answer. Did you ever at any time, and I'm talking about any time before Diane McIver's death or after her death, either before September 2016 or after September 2016, engage in any sexual conduct, however you want to define it, with Tex McIver?
Never. After 27 days of trial proceedings, closing arguments were made. The jury was given 3 options in the death of Diane Smith McIver: murder with malice, involuntary manslaughter, or assault. The first district attorney circled back to the gun, to the intent, and the veiled and not so veiled attempts of witness tampering.
We don't have to prove that the defendant hated Diane. That's not what legal malice is. It's just the intention to kill without a justification, excuse, or mitigation. If this killing is done with malice, no matter how short of time that developed, then it is murder under the law. Malice can be formed in an instant. In an instant. It can be formed the moment that your hand wraps around that trigger.
She said there are 2 types of malice: express and implied. Express malice is the deliberate intention to kill. She said, we know Tex shot Diane by squeezing that trigger, using 12 pounds of force. Implied malice can be inferred by the conduct and the circumstances of the killing. She said it happens when no considerable provocation appears, when the circumstances show an abandoned and malignant heart. She said in this case, the conduct immediately after the killing is so important.
You have shot your wife in the back, close to her heart. She is bleeding out. Her body is in that process that Dr. Sellers and Dr. Henninger described, where she's shunting off blood. Her body is in life-saving mode, sending blood to her vital organs so that she can fight to stay alive. And those few minutes that follow that shooting is precious for her, because those are the few minutes that determine if she lives or dies. In those few minutes, this defendant is telling Danny Jo Carter, be careful. There could be people out with a baby carriage. Be careful. And he directs her to Emory University Hospital on Clifton Road. Claude McIver works at Fisher and Phillips, just 2 blocks from the scene of this shooting. And they drive to Emory University Hospital in the defendant's 2013 SUV with a working GPS navigation system. In the back seat, just to the left of his knee, is a plugged-in, charged-up iPhone. There is no call to 911. The first call this defendant makes is to his criminal defense attorney, Steve Maples.
She asked the jury to use their common sense. Tex's defense attorney then pointed out all of the reasonable doubt. He said there are at least 16 instances, but that the jury only needs 1. He focused on what he saw as the most important: Diane and Tex's love for each other.
Let's talk about the theory that it's a planned, intentional murder. I'm going to give you 16 doubts. And the first one is the one that Amanda talked about in her opening statement. They were in love. Okay? You can poo-poo that. You can say that's ridiculous. You can say whatever you want to say. But there is no doubt about it. They were like little teenagers in love, young teenagers in love. We had witnesses testify that they would be in the kitchen cooking, and someone would walk in, and there they'd be kissing, right? Like our teenagers do. Okay? Or they were just together all the time. Nobody ever saw them fight. Nobody ever saw them arguing. Nobody ever heard her say, "I'm going to foreclose if you don't pay me my money." Nobody ever heard her say anything about my second will is going to affect, next week. There was nothing like that. How can you ignore that evidence? How can you ignore the fact that they clearly were in love?
The prosecution, however, had their final say.
Let me tell you something. This case doesn't have nothing to do with no sleep disorder. Nothing. That's just a bunch of baloney. It's a bunch of baloney.
After 4 days of deliberations, the jury returned. During court, they had asked a total of 284 questions. But on Monday, April 23rd, they came in with their verdict.
On count one, murder, we find the defendant not guilty. On count two, felony murder, we find the defendant guilty of felony murder.
The jury didn't find Tex guilty of malice murder, but they did find him guilty of the remaining charges: felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during a felony, and influencing a witness. At his sentencing, Tex addressed the court. He first addressed all the support he has received while he's been in jail. The audio is pretty incoherent, so I'm just going to read parts of what he said. The outpouring of support has been beyond anything that any of us expected. A month ago, this trial occurred, and last week, on one given day, I received 11 different pieces of mail. And yesterday, I received 11 different pieces of mail from 3 people, from individuals on 3 different continents. One I would like to point out, because it seems to be fairly common, is a lady from Ireland. She says, "Dear Mr. McIver, you do not know me, but I watched your trial online and I wanted to write to offer you my support. The injustice done to you is shocking. Your sister gave me your address. Know that a lot of people see through these lies. Thank you." Tex continued describing other letters he had received, and then said that neighbors had brought him food while he was on house arrest. Friends delivered Chick-fil-A, one of his, quote, huge favorites and one of the things I miss the most about the food in jail. He said his grandchildren have sent him drawings, which depict him as the hero in a picture story. He spoke about their godson, Austin, and other family members. Then he addressed Diane. "The luckiest day of my life is when Diane chose me, and in doing so, we started a relationship that can only be described as amazing. We loved each other like small children, unabashedly devoted to each other, and so on." What many people could not possibly know, because it has never been revealed, and I am going to give up the secret today, we felt so strongly about each other, and we were together so much, that we actually had a secret among us. And that was that we would be different places. We would look at each other, and we would say, sometimes even in unison, "Is this truly real? Is this real?" He then said, "Since this tragedy, I have spent 263 nights in a jail cell by myself, but not alone. She has joined me there. It is a presence. It is hard to describe, but she has left her earth suit. And after the 3 different ceremonies that we had for her, 2 in Atlanta for celebration of life, and 1 in Texas for celebration of life, where we tried to say goodbye to her, she never said goodbye to me, and she's been there. It's as if she's on the other side of a curtain or in another dimension. On this earth, she was my life and made me complete. Certainly not that way now. But if I might just say to her directly, because I know she's here, I feel her presence as I'm speaking these words. Darling, you have brought me more joy and fulfillment that few men on this earth have ever known. Thank you. And until we are together again, because it is truly real, it is truly real. Thank you." But Judge Robert McBurney was not impressed. He told those present in the courtroom about the loss of Diane McIver. He didn't dispute Tex's proclaimed love for her.
The jury concluded that you, Mr. McIver, intentionally pulled the trigger of that firearm, not with the intent to kill your wife and the family matriarch for Corey Enterprises, but that you intentionally pulled the trigger. And they delivered a verdict that supported that conclusion. I do believe, consistent with what Ms. Clark Palmer said, that if you in fact love Diane McIver as much as you've just shared with me, and others have shared with me through the letters and what we heard at trial,
And there really isn't a form of punishment that any judge could impose that would be more severe than the burden of knowing that you took Diane McIver from all of us.
But Judge McBurney was truly struck by one part of Tex's statement. He noted there was one thing Tex didn't say during his time addressing the court.
I'll tell you what's most telling. You had as much time as you wanted to share with me what you thought was important for me to hear and I guess your audience to hear. We heard about racehorses in Australia and Chick-fil-A and telepathy, a brief psychoanalysis of the male ego and ghosts. I didn't ever hear you say you're sorry for what you did. To me, that silence speaks volumes.
Claude Tex McIver was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Since the criminal trial finished, Diane's estate sued Tex McIver for wrongful death. In March of 2020, the two parties settled outside of court. Tex currently sits in prison in the state of Georgia. And that's all for this episode. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you agree with the verdict? Let me know by joining the conversation on Instagram @CourtJunkie, by tweeting me @CourtJunkiePod, or by emailing me at podcast@CourtJunkie.com. This episode was researched and written by Polly Katowski with Law and Crime. You can follow her on Twitter and Instagram @Polly Katowski. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/CourtJunkie. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.